Mode.
Hi, Rod.
Hey, we have
Oh, what?
two Zoom links. I don't know if you saw my email. So the speakers have a different Zoom link from the participants. We just have to
Oh,
migrate them
no.
to the other
Okay.
one.
So which one? So I moved.
Hello, good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. Maybe before we start, if we can just ask everybody, please rename yourself with your organization and your name, which I will also do. My name's not there yet, but if we can just put our name at the start and then the organization that you are affiliated with after, just so that we know where everybody is from. We can take like the next minute or so to do that. Thank you. Awesome. Great to see everyone. We have such a good number of people here, and we are really excited for today's session. So I'd just like to formally welcome everybody to our no nonsense advice session around cultivating inclusive support for refugee, rural, and Indigenous entrepreneurs. We have such a great panel of speakers today who have such a wealth of experience working with these different communities. And we're so happy to see the interest that people have towards this subject and wanting to learn more about how to support these communities. So maybe to just get us started for today, we want to do our check-in as always for Pollinate. So Tess, if you could bring up our Mentimeter. Awesome. Thank you. Let me just send the link real quick to our Menti. Awesome. Thanks, Tess. So if you see on the chat, we have our Mentimeter linked, or you can also use the code on top, which is 7292555992 if you go to menti.com. So first question, we'd love to know where everybody is coming from. I don't think I got to introduce myself. I'm Rod. I'm from the Philippines. I'm from Pollinate Impact, and I'm the community choreographer. Nice to see people coming from the Philippines as well. Kenya also, Ghana, India. And then, of course, we have Taiwan, Palestine. Awesome. USA, great. One of our speakers is from Cambodia. Matt, are you in Myanmar right now or the US?
I'm actually in the US. Good morning.
Or US? Oh, good morning. Cynthia, whereabouts are you right now? Awesome. There's
I'm in
people
Kenya.
from in Kenya. McKenna, about yourself?
Kenya. I'm in
Kenya
Nairobi.
as well. Awesome. So we have a good mix. Netherlands as well. Okay, great. So great mix of people. Let's go to the next. So what best describes your organization? We just want to know what the room is composed of right now. Are you mostly incubators and accelerators? Are there other groups here right now? Entrepreneurs, maybe? All right, so we have a few incubators and accelerators here with us. Great. Awesome, an academic institution is also here. Oh, All right. Great. So we
You
have,
okay, Rod? Yeah.
no worries. We have a few incubators and accelerators, and please feel free to continue answering. For the new people who just came in, we're just doing our quick check-in before our session starts. All right, let's go to the next test. Thank you. Great. We also want to know what's one specific thing that you hope to learn or gain from today's discussion. It'll also help our speakers kind of, focus on the points that might be helpful for you. So let us know if there's anything that you want to gain for today. What would that specific thing be? Let's have a little think. If not through the Menti, you can also use the chat box. Differentiation, more participatory approaches, so how to involve the communities, clarity and insight. Great. Best practices. All right, maybe we can move to the next. Thank you so much. Support. In terms of today's session, motivated you to attend. So if we want to gain more insight and clarity on how to support, maybe even best practices, we also want to know what motivated you to join today's session, specifically today's session, right? Curious. Okay, I work in this space and I'm curious to hear from others. That's great to hear. Of course, we have a room for quick discussion and Q&As later, so we hope to get your experience as well, learn how other organizations support these type of entrepreneurs, know what can be done to be inclusive for all. Gain more insight on how to support innovative young people and learn from experiences of others. Great, thank you. And then I think we have one last question, right, Tess? Okay, so maybe just in terms of current understanding, what's the biggest challenge that you feel refugee, rural, and Indigenous entrepreneurs face in accessing support? So it's a broad definition of support, right? Whether that's incubation support, financial support, but just in your current understanding, the biggest challenge is financing. Okay. Most opportunities are often only available in metro cities. Give one more minute. People are not even aware that there's support being provided, confidence in themselves, support not really tailored to their unique needs, information asymmetry. Great. Okay. So there seems to be, a little bit of understanding about these communities and what they are also experiencing. So that's great to hear. And maybe thank you all for joining our check-in questions on Menti. We hope that more of these discussions will happen after our sharing of experiences. And, it seems that there's a lot of interest in this topic. So that's really great. All right, thank you, Tess, for sharing our Menti. And maybe without further ado, we'll just introduce each of our speakers. Unfortunately, Grace from Response Innovation Lab is not here, but we do have four awesome speakers today who are joining us to talk about their experiences. And before maybe they share their experience working with these entrepreneurs, these communities, we'll give 2 minutes for each of them to just share about themselves, their organization, and then maybe what they like to do outside of work. So I'll first hand it over to Moni from Impact Hub Phnom Penh to introduce himself, and then we'll hand it to the next one. All right, go ahead, Moni.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you, well, virtually, of course. I can see some familiar names. So, hi everyone. My name is Moni. My full name is Thaipat Mani. I'm from Impact Hub Phnom Penh, based in here, Phnom Penh, Cambodia. I've been working in the field of diversity, equity, inclusion for the past 3 to 4 years already. As a LGBT person, as a ethnic minority, and a youth from rural area myself. I work closely with other Impact Hub across the globe. If you didn't know, we are a global network in coaching and supporting other Impact Hub in diversity, equity, inclusion, which also translates to my role. Forgot to mention my role. I am the DEI expert for Impact Hub Network. But nice to meet everyone here. Really looking forward to share as well as to learn from other speakers as well as the participant. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Moni. Great to have you here. I'll pass it on to Cynthia from Inoko.
Hi everyone, my name is Tim Pendeti. I'm Program Director at Inoko. I sit in the Kenya office, and my work is to make sure the programs are running smoothly and that we are impactful and innovative through the different locations we are in. So at Inoko, we work with micro and small entrepreneurs, including refugees, to create jobs, improve livelihoods, and build thriving communities. I've been with Inoko for 2 years, but I've also been in the entrepreneurship space for now 15 years. So looking forward to the conversation and learning more from other speakers. Thank you.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Cynthia. I'll pass it on to McKenna from Village Capital.
Hello, everyone. My name is Makena Odongo. I'm based out of Nairobi, and I'm a program manager at Village Capital. I've been with Village Capital for just over 4 years. And just a bit about Village Capital is we work as ecosystem builders. So we work with both entrepreneurs and entrepreneur support organizations by trying to build the local ecosystems with which we work. And we are active in 6 regions, which is Africa, Europe, LATAM, MENA, South Asia, and the US. And in my free time, I like to go for walks and spend time with my dog.
Great. That sounds awesome. Thank you so much, McKenna. And then last but not least, we have Matt from Onow.
Thanks, Rod. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Wallace. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a business support organization called Onow. I spent most of my career in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar, and then some time in Thailand. Currently in the US, but I'm all over the world often. Our work especially focused on typically young women who are migrating from village to city, though cross-border refugee work is also part of what we do. And our work with those audiences specifically led us down the pathway of creating accessible technology specifically for business owner support. So that's a little bit of the lens that I'll bring to the conversation today. Thanks, Rod.
Awesome. Sounds exciting. Thank you, Matt. All right. So we've got a little bit of an introduction from our speakers, and maybe it's time for them to also share their experiences, and we will start with so we'll go through each of them and they'll share their own community focus and what their experiences and practical strategy. So we will start with the way that they also introduce themselves. So from Moni, and then we'll go to Cynthia, and then McKenna, and then Matt to close us off. So just to keep us going, I'll hand it over to Moni, and then if you can just pass it on to the next speaker so that I don't have to be a distraction in between the discussions. Awesome. So to give us a little bit of an overview of the common challenges of the communities we are talking about today, and also on their experience in working with Indigenous entrepreneurs, I will hand it over to Moni.
Thank you again. A bit nervous of starting the discussion, but super excited at the same time. I will share my screen now. There we go. Could everyone do a prompt if everyone can see my screen?
Yeah,
Perfect.
I can see your screen.
Thank you. So before I begin, I would also like to do a land acknowledgement because due to the fact that our work, we talk about Indigenous community, we talk about rural community, we talk about refugee, and it's very much to the core of our work and our passion. With this, I do want to start us with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that I want to acknowledge the ancestor, the indigenous community, all of the native first people of all of the community that were here before us, that were cherishing our land, supporting our land, looking after, curing our land. And we are very grateful to be able to live off the land of now today that was once taken care of by the ancestor, the community that is still here today. But I want to acknowledge that we will not be able to harvest and be fruitful of where we are standing on right now without the ancestor, without the indigenous community that was here before us or with us during us in the past ancient time. With that, I was giving a very, I would say, difficult question on opening up the discussion on common challenges, success, as well as distinguishing factors regarding indigenous entrepreneur that are refugee, entrepreneur that are from rural area. It was a bit of a stretch for me too, due to the fact that I work mostly with indigenous entrepreneur. Some with from entrepreneur from rural area, but I don't have a lot of experience, actually not at all, in entrepreneur that are refugees. So please feel free to correct me, feedback and comment, and let me know about my sharing also. But opening us up in the 3 profile of entrepreneur, one of the main I would see and find during my work with an indigenous entrepreneur and entrepreneur from rural area is that a lot of resources are not accessible by the community. And in terms of accessibility, it also means area. So a lot of us also already mentioned that a lot of things happen in metro city, a lot of things happen in capital area. And then sometimes accessibility also means languages. Sometimes it only available in the majority language and not available in the minority language, and other etc. that allows for the resources that we provide as entrepreneurs support system or organization that we create is not accessible. One commonality in terms of challenges that all 3 different profile entrepreneurs face could also be legal protection. A lot of indigenous community lack the legal rights in their land owning. A lot of entrepreneur from rural area does not have literacy in legal protection enough, and that could lead them to a lot of business legal issues. And then, of course, in terms of entrepreneurs that are refugees, there are the conversation about the host country in terms of setting up a business, in terms of citizenship and other things that I already see that us mentioned in like work permit and so on and so on. And one thing that I really want to bring into attention to all of us is that we need to understand that these different entrepreneurs, especially the 3 entrepreneurs that we're talking about right now, is that their community has been historically excluded, and we're not starting at the same point. This is one thing that I really want to stress on, is that the entrepreneur that we're talking about right now, entrepreneurs that are facing marginalization, are facing underrepresentation, facing discrimination, they are historically being excluded. That leads to we're not starting at the same point. Other entrepreneurs have more privileges, and we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that there are historical disadvantages that has been set in the system itself that allow for disadvantages for these entrepreneurs. With that, I went down to break down the commonality that we just talked about into different aspects, and you will hear more from our speaker after me, and especially from, I would say, entrepreneur from rural area and entrepreneur that are refugee. I think our speakers after me will be able to share more concrete evidence as well as example and good practices regarding working with entrepreneur from rural area and entrepreneur that are refugee. Here's from my research and from my work with little experience. Entrepreneurs from rural area face a lot of infrastructural support due to the fact that Again, most things happens in capital city, metro area, and not a lot of things happen in rural area. And then it also limits market access. Imagine starting a business that's very valuable, very viable, that can very scale up, that can very sell in the market, but the market is not here. The market is somewhere else. You have to relocate, you have to think about so many other things. And then moving on to Indigenous entrepreneur. Indigenous entrepreneur issue or challenge is very, very different, which we'll dive deeper into a little bit later on, is that Indigenous entrepreneur, the concept of entrepreneurship is our concept. One thing that the concept of entrepreneurship is what we have as a concept, and that Indigenous entrepreneur might not have the same concept of entrepreneurship or business. Indigenous community, not just entrepreneur, Indigenous community as a general, have always worked within sustainability, sustainability in terms of farming, agriculture, culture preservation, and everything. And the idea of selling, buying, sale, and business is not to their concept. With that, Indigenous entrepreneur navigate historical disadvantage every day, facing cultural elimination and oppression. And we'll talk a little bit later on what do I mean by cultural elimination and oppression. And with entrepreneur that are refugee, I think it's very out there, and we all know about this, is that not everyone speaks the same languages. So for entrepreneurs that are refugee, migrating to another country, trying to migrate, because refugee can also sometimes still be at their country and trying to migrate to another country, to another host country, another territory or whatever. But when migrating, there's a barrier of culture, language, legal barrier, and of course, lack access to finance is pretty much all across 3 different profile. Limiting to network is pretty much also all across 3 different profile. And with what we just talked about, I also want to offer some question that I have to ask all of us today. Is that when we address entrepreneur from rural area in their challenge in terms of limiting infrastructure support, how can we, as entrepreneurship support organization, improve access to transportation, digital tool, and connecting them to a broader market? So how can we be the gap between metro and rural, or I think the English word is urban and rural? How can we be the bridge between urban and rural? And how can we bring opportunity, all of this, to entrepreneurial area? This is a question I want to bring to the conversation today. And then for Indigenous entrepreneur, we're talking about navigating historically disadvantaged, cultural elimination. So the question that I want to ask is, how can we advocate for an understanding of Indigenous culture, as well as policy that support Indigenous rights and economic participation? So how do we do entrepreneurship support programs that support Indigenous community with their context and with their meaning of entrepreneurship? And entrepreneur that are refugee, when we talk about lack of access to finance, limited to network, cultural, language, and legal barrier, how can we support entrepreneurs that are refugee in navigating the legal system and connecting them with the local business community to bridge the gap between I'm a refugee, this is a host country, but it's a market for all? So 3 questions that I'm bringing to the discussion, hoping to have some reflection, and that when we have the sharing, you can also share back and contribute to the solution of these questions. But I will go ahead to dive deeper into the topic and into the profile of Indigenous entrepreneur. So here's my belief, I would say, as someone who works in diversity, equity, inclusion, and someone who works in inclusive entrepreneurship, I believe that equitable and accessible opportunity bridge the gap of community that has been historically marginalized, underrepresented, and left behind. And it's a question that everyone needs to reflect on. Is opportunity that I bring, does it bridge gap? Is it equitable? Is it accessible? Contextualizing Indigenous entrepreneur challenges. So I'm using IE for Indigenous entrepreneur. Now, I do want to really open the conversation for a disclaimer that Indigenous, it's a very broad term, and that depending on where we're from, which tribe, which community, which territory, Indigenous entrepreneur will have their own preferred name to be called themselves. Therefore, we should always ask of how we should refer to them. But in this conversation where I'm speaking a bit more general and more broadly, I would use the word Indigenous entrepreneur. I myself is an ethnic minority, even though in some contexts, people would label me as Indigenous. I identify myself as ethnic minority. So that's also one thing to look at. In contextualization of Indigenous entrepreneur challenges, one thing I want to bring into this discussion today is that we have to be aware that Indigenous entrepreneur and Indigenous community in general lacks land rights and resources access. What does that mean? Indigenous community evolve within agriculture and tourism. They live off the land, they work with the land, they live with the land. The land is their parents, their brother, their sister, their gods, their past, their future, and their present. Lands ties very closely to Indigenous community, and that's translate to the way that they work or the entrepreneurship that they take on. With that, a lot of Indigenous entrepreneur works in agriculture and tourism or traditional and sustainable practices. But because of how, we'll talk a little bit into this, because of how capitalism, policy, and policy making, and other things, there's a lack of land rights to Indigenous entrepreneur, where they live off this land, they live with this land for a long time. However, since they don't have the legal protection or the knowledge of legal protection, they're not able to register their land, they're not able to, and then in some cases, there has been law passed on that that doesn't allow foraging, for example. This happens a lot in North America and Latin America. There's a law that doesn't allow for foraging, for example, and that's completely ruined the business aspect of traditional knowledge, because Indigenous knowledge works with land and foraging, you know? And then social discrimination is a challenge that I believe all of us understand, is that a lot of majority demographics has prejudice as well as discrimination aspect and thoughts toward Indigenous entrepreneur. There's misconception, there's stereotype due to the fact of lack of understanding, there's straight up discrimination and racism toward Indigenous community, which make it harder for Indigenous entrepreneur to bring their product to the wider market, because there's already a preset idea of what Indigenous is or what Indigenous product could be and how it's not as convenient as modern product or industrial product, and so on and so on. Because of these stereotype and social discrimination, Indigenous entrepreneur has a hard time in accessing to market. Two more challenges that I want to offer in our discussion is that economic disadvantage and access to capital is pretty much all across, I would say, every marginalized community, right? Because due to the fact that, like I mentioned in the beginning, historically has been discriminated for many years, which makes what we have now, the financial system, what we have now does not accommodate Indigenous community and other community that's been marginalized. And examples such as collateral, formal things that we are considered as norm, where it's not the norm for Indigenous community and it doesn't benefit or create reasonable accommodation for Indigenous entrepreneur to access to finance or capital. So this is a deeper issue that we all need to start to look into. Social and political marginalization is what I mentioned in the top also, is that there are policy or politic or people in politics that are straight up discriminative toward Indigenous community, towards certain community, not just Indigenous, which lead to policy that were created in favor of majority, but leads to a lot of marginalization for Indigenous community. and well as, again, infrastructure support, service, as well as development. So with all of these challenges, because 5 minutes, perfect, I have 5 minutes. Because of all of these challenges, Impact Hub Network, we partner with FSC to do a research, and the research is called Toolkit for Inclusive and Relevant Business Support for Indigenous Entrepreneurs. You're able to find this on Impact Hub Network website. If you go to Impact Hub, if you search Impact Hub and go to Impact Resources, you'll find this toolkit. And in this research plus toolkit, we're able to find 5 findings. One is a lot of indigenous entrepreneur needs training, mentorship, connection, and financial support, as well as ongoing support for their business, which I'm glad to see that a lot of us here in the beginning of the Mentimeter are accelerator and incubator, which is the perfect thing for you to check out if you're willing or working or hoping to work with indigenous entrepreneur, this toolkit. And in the next slide, oops, what just happened? I just clicked to the website, sorry. And the next slide is the toolkit itself. So what I'm presenting is what in the toolkit, by the way. It's not new things. So then I'm presenting a glimpse of what the toolkit is, and you're welcome to check the toolkit out afterward. In the toolkit, we believe that when working with indigenous entrepreneur or any indigenous community and indigenous stakeholder, we have to follow 4 principles: trust, inclusion, accountability, and strategic partnership. Trust, we all know what that means, building trust. Inclusion is something that I really want to stress upon is the principle of nothing about us without us. We can't do indigenous work without indigenous community. If you're making a program for indigenous community, make sure there are indigenous community inside the development, inside the designing, inside implementation, inside the program. You're not doing something for them without them. This is very important that I want everyone to understand, is that we don't know what it is until we are it is. So inclusion is one cultural part of the designing process. This is a principle we follow. This is a practical tip from the toolkit. Feel free to check it out later. I also put a page. In page 22 of the toolkit, you'll find example of questions of things that you can ask. So we recommend that when starting a program for indigenous community, organize a understanding workshop with indigenous community, ally, or strategic partner. And then on the right side of this picture, there are questions that we provide for you to ask so that you can understand better when doing this workshop and when implementing your program. So for example, the question is, what are the best coordination mechanic between the incubator, indigenous community, and resources that sport organization have? So you ask the indigenous community themselves, and then we find a co-creation answer to this. Another practical tip I want to give from the toolkit itself is that we also have to look into accessible application material. And this is the step I'm not going through, but I want to focus on is the quote that is giving on the right side. And my team and I in Cambodia interviewed him personally. He said, I learned about the opportunity because they came to us. The application was tough, but the support made it possible. And this is a very good example of outreach, is that we did the program, we think the program is going to reach, but it might not reach. And maybe what it needs further is our support. Sometimes when we do an application that has to be right, for example, indigenous community have their own language, and what we use in the application is not their first language. So a writing application is maybe not the best. So for Bong Mien Mon, who is indigenous Khoi community entrepreneur in Cambodia, the people that opened the application actually help him to write, but they ask him the question, verbally ask him, and have him have an answer. So also look into this creative way of accessible and creative, inclusive application that allows for more community to be able to participate. And last practical tips, there's more tip, by the way, there's like 8 or like 10 tips in the toolkit itself, which I'm only bringing 3, is have you ever thought about working for indigenous entrepreneur? For us as an incubator, as an accelerator, we always do training, mentoring, other aspect of capacity building. But have you ever think about going into their community and work for them as their staff? This is one thing that we start doing at Impact Hub Phnom Penh specifically. When we finish a program, it doesn't end there. We advocate and we budget for like 3 days of our working time to go work for the entrepreneur themselves. I went to the indigenous business in province in Cambodia, and I worked with them. They asked me to do poster design. They asked me to help with financial projection. I worked for them under their lead. So here's another things that we can do in our accelerator and incubation program. And that's pretty much it. I hope I didn't take too much time. This is what I would like to share, and I can share from working with Indigenous entrepreneur. And I can't wait to learn more from our other speaker in working with other entrepreneur. And yes, I think
Awesome. Thank you,
I can be nice.
Moni. That was really great. I will the pin and then I will pass it on to Cynthia from Inkomoko.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Pune. I feel like the things are cross-cutting, so mine was not too hard. For me was to just talk about the context of refugees and the unique challenges that they are in that space. So for us and Inkomoko, as I mentioned, we do work with entrepreneurs, micro and small, and what we do, including refugees, of course, and what we do is we create jobs, improve livelihoods, and build thriving communities. And for us, where the space we're in Africa, we host 44 million displaced people. That is like a third of the world's refugee population. And thousands of communities are isolated, are disconnected from economic development. There's a lot of work that has been done, but there's still more that we need to do. So most of them live in a state of permanent and social economic exclusion. And most of our work we do in that area. And for us to be able to do more, we need to work more together, we need to be inclusive, and we have to have programs that actually cater for the spaces and the refugees in that area. So I'll go straight to the unique challenges that we do have. And one of them, and I've had Moni mention the same, is lack of documentation. We do not have, refugees do not have the necessary documentation for them to be able to move around. You know, simple things like just having an alien ID takes years to be able to, to be processed. Even being able to move from one space to another, for us in Kenya specifically, you're not able to move from one camp to another camp because of the documentation. And even getting that pass to move is like getting a golden ticket. So it's really hard to be able to, work with entrepreneurs in that space and also expect the growth trajectory that we do want to have. And then there are also a lot of legal barriers, and because of this documentation, they face a lot of harassment, even from the people in government. You will get being harassed, they're not able to get their commodities, they're even getting commodities that are not licensed, and also people take advantage of them. So it becomes really difficult for them to even get spaces to work from, difficult for them to open bank accounts, difficult for them to even access financing. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen in the space of getting documentation and necessary documentation for them to be able to thrive. And then, of course, there's in the insecurity bit. We have a lot of insecurity that is happening in our spaces. And this is because we have increased numbers of displaced persons just getting into the space. And of course, the resources are limited. So insecurity goes high. How do we manage this? Do we have enough local players in the space to be able to manage this? And then, of course, even when we talk about refugees, we should not forget to talk about the host communities. These are the people who live next to the refugees, and we cannot, deny the fact that they have also unmet needs. They live under the poverty line. They are also experiencing the same problems the refugees are, if not all. And if we are giving, space, or we are giving, some of these programs to the refugees, we also need to see how we can also accommodate the host communities. So I will jump right into practical tips and also what we've been able to do as Inkomoko. One, we believe that if we give entrepreneurs the skills, the access to finance, and markets for inclusive economic policies and inclusive economic policies, they'll be able to thrive. So if we can train and we can invest and we can connect, then we believe we'll be able to serve these entrepreneurs or these refugees. So we do this on 3 levels. We do the household level, we do the market level, and we do the ecosystem level. For the household level, this is where I also had Moni mention, we do trainings and consulting. So we do have a program that goes 9 months to 12 months, where we do trainings and we offer very tailored trainings depending on what category of entrepreneur you are. May it be an idea stage, existing business, or you just want market linkages, or you just want financing. So we have tailor-made those modules to suit the different categories of entrepreneurs we have. And we believe if we give the trainings and consulting and business tools, which can be as simple as just having record keeping, a document or a manual, or also an app, because we do have entrepreneurs who have access to technology and also provide low cost investment, I think we will be able to create opportunities for these individuals. The second level is the market level. And this is where we think, or we know that if we link businesses to new markets outside their communities, and if we improve access to goods and services by providing connection with suppliers, solve transportation challenges, we are able to integrate these businesses into the value chains. And therefore we'll be able to create healthy local economies. And the last bit, which is important, and I feel like all of us are going to touch about, is inclusion. How do we integrate societies with rights and opportunities for all? How to foster sustainable solutions through advocacy and building capacity for local institutions. Let's be in the roundtables, let's be in the focus group discussions, let's be in the policy making space. How do we integrate ourselves into these conversations so that we are part and parcel in the decisions that are made in the policy level? So for us, those levels have been able to work in our space, and the tips of support, I think, would come for Inoko again. One will be flexible funding options. The spaces we work in, they do not get the traditional funding. How do we customize the funding options that we have to be able to work with them? So if we can have various stages of funding for the people we work in, and of course, very flexible, because we know there are documents they do not have. If they do not have an ID, it means they cannot open a bank account, they cannot transact using mobile services. How do we make sure that when they do not have this, they can still access funding? That is one. And what we've done, even for Inoko, we have tried to work also with our communities. And one is, we know we work in the space of, we work with Islamic communities. And because we cannot give our normal funding, our normal investment, we are in the profit sharing. So we do make sure that our funding is Sharia compliant, example. We also work with idea stage, so we make sure it's 0 rated, okay? And we also work with businesses that are excelling, that are doing amazing work in the space, and we make sure we have a 10% at reducing, so we're very low cost in the market. And then we also advocate for inclusive policies, as I mentioned earlier. Let's be in the space. If you are in that space of refugee, how are you inserting or asserting yourself to make sure that you are in the spaces that you can give knowledge that you have been able to collect over the years? Example for us, we are in the space of having the conversation to implement the Shirika plan, to be able to integrate the refugees in the communities. So how do you insert yourself to make sure you're having those conversations? And the last one will be partnerships and local organization. We know we work in this space, but there are also people who are amazingly working in the space and have been there for years. For example, for us, I said we train, we invest, we connect. We're not in the business of protection. We're not in the business of social service support. So when we see that we have people who need protection or who need psychosocial support, we have partners that we have partnered with. We have people who have been in the space for a while. We even partner with community leaders because they are the ones who know the kind of entrepreneurs we want, and they know where to find them and how to connect with them, even help us with the kind of knowledge we need to bring to them. Even translation, because we also mentioned that they speak different languages. So who better to work with if not the community members that are in this space? So a lot of partnership and collaboration with the local organizations in this space. And lastly, job creation. We talk about jobs and how the entrepreneurs do not have jobs, but we are not employing them ourselves. How do we also integrate this into our everyday working? How do we create tailored programs to make sure also the refugees are in our jobs, and they can access other jobs in the different organizations that we work with? So yeah, that's it. And I'm happy to take other questions and also some reflections. Thank you. Over to you, Rod.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. What a great sharing, and I hope we can get to know more during the discussion part. Let me turn it over to McKenna of Village Capital to give her experience. McKenna, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Rod. Let me get started. So I will share my screen. But before that, I have shared a link in the chat because a lot of what I'll be speaking on is kind of connected to, it's actually basically connected to the research that we did around rural ecosystems. So let me, oh, do I go here? I hope you can all see my screen. Yeah, so.
Yes, we can hear you. We can see your screen.
Yes, so Village Capital is an organization that has been working with entrepreneurs and entrepreneur support organizations for a while. And based off the work that we've been doing, it's been over 10 years, I would say. And we've worked with over, I'd say, hundreds of entrepreneur support organizations across the world, and in Africa, more than 70. And so we partnered with Small Foundation to kind of look into a specific sector, which was the rural enterprise ecosystem. And with that, we worked with both intermediaries and had them kind of do what they do, which is basically offer support to the entrepreneurs. And from that, we kind of try to assess what is working based on the support that these entrepreneurs are receiving from these ecosystem entrepreneur support organizations. Yep. And so we had a way that we're defining rural enterprises, which was basically any enterprise that has a form of impact within the rural enterprise, whether it's through employment, through rural environmental conservation, and that kind of thing. And so for this particular research, we worked with 19 partners, but we had a landscape study of 359 entrepreneur support organizations. And we then got to dig deeper into the data of about 165 entrepreneurs. And so some of the findings we highlighted was that as with the intermediaries working with these local populations as local intermediaries, just so I can put that in there, is that there was an increase in their revenue. They also increased in financing, and there was also some job creation as well. And so what are some of the findings we saw with the challenges? So the challenges, I would say, are more or less the same for a lot of these that we've already touched on and you've had before. And so things like access to finance was critical. It was mentioned quite a bit. Market access, infrastructure deficit, and skill gaps, as well as vulnerability to climate change, mostly because within the sub-Saharan context which we're looking at, a lot of them do agrarian kind of businesses. So with climate, that is very susceptible to different changes depending on what's there. And so what we looked at as potential opportunities for these spaces was tailored financial solutions. And as Village Capital, we do have a Capital Explorer. And if I can pop it in the chat, actually, I think I will do that after I'm done presenting. So let me just go back to my slides. So tailored financial solutions that actually work for these local intermediaries, as well as capacity building and mentorship, and overall engagement of local partners. So I've really just echoed what a lot of my two colleagues that have come in before me have said. And I'd say for me, the thing is, this all boils down to because the challenges are the same and they're recurring, it all boils down to how we implement the solutions. And this brings us back again to inclusion, because if you look at rural communities, they're often more closed off, more guarded. And that's why we took the local ecosystem entrepreneur support organization approach, which is whereby we looked at intermediaries, and they were offering business development support, incubation, acceleration to those communities. So we looked at them as kind of the trusted source, or a place for where these rural enterprises can be more vulnerable and share, and kind of looked at what are they doing to kind of solve these challenges for the entrepreneurs. And what we found was that having the local aspect, which then ties into the inclusion, is very important, because you would find, in as much as the support may not be quote unquote as sophisticated as maybe being offered by a multinational or an organization in a metro city, I can see that's what we're calling it, it still has more impact when delivered by a local support partner, simply because there's the level of trust that's built between these communities and the people that they already interact with. So this ties into basically empowering and impacting local intermediaries. Like I'd say Inoko does seem to be having interaction with their local community, and they seem to be locally placed. So basically facilitating capital and support into such organizations directly benefits the rural and ecosystem, because they have a direct access and a direct influence and impact on the rural ecosystems. Because from our findings, we saw that in as much as the support they offer is very limited, they were still offering impact to these communities. And these are organizations that are working in circumstances or environments where they're very strained. Because I think I'll just stop my share for a second. Some of the things that we saw, if I can maybe highlight a different slide, is that for a lot of these intermediaries, they're working on annual budgets of less than 500,000. They struggle with commercial viability simply because they operate on donor funding. The customers that they serve do not have the ability to pay. So these are very stretched organizations that are trying their best to still build an ecosystem, in as much as they themselves are struggling to also keep the lights on and keep doing the work that they do. So I'd say, on top of everything that's already been highlighted that kind of ties in together, I'd say a lot of the challenges and solutions being offered by on the refugee side also kind of tie into the rural side as well. So the only other thing that I would add is just supporting the intermediaries that do the work, that do this kind of work, and supporting the organizations that take time to actually focus and hone in on these more vulnerable populations, because they are like a big contributor to the ecosystems and the communities that they serve, in a way that people working, giving kind of like a satellite solution, may not have the same influence or impact, in as much as they do have the necessary resources. So I'd say kind of trickling down the support to have local intermediaries and problem solvers kind of solving for local solutions, which then ties again to the whole inclusion aspect. And yeah, so that's, I'd say, kind of maybe what I would add onto the conversation without going back and repeating everything that has been mentioned by my colleagues. And I'll be available for the discussion. So Rod, I'll hand it back to you.
Sorry. Thanks so much, McKenna. A great presentation. Before we head to the discussion, we have one last share, one last peer share. Matt from Onow. Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rod. I am going to try to share a screen, so let me know if you see this come through, okay? Thumbs up.
Yep.
Is it full screen? Are you okay? Yeah, great. So hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. To all the other presenters, you've covered this with a lot of diligence. Thanks for the time and attention put to this really important issue. I'm going to, some of this will feel repetitive, but I'm going to try to bring a few application pieces to you all that hopefully will let you maybe grasp some of the low-hanging fruit around how to support these communities, which we call transient communities. And a lot of this is really about taking the circle of access that they have and just trying to push it out so that they can access more markets, access more networks, access more finance that might just be right outside of the edge, the margin of that circle that they're exposed to. That's how we think about it at Onow. So first off, a little background on who we are. We at Onow enable women on the margins to become financially capable and empowered entrepreneurs. And let me just say, we didn't actually start out for that. We started out focused on young people. And what we realized really quickly is that in a place like Myanmar, where we first started, most young people were moving from one place to another. They were moving from a village to the city. They were moving from the city across border into another country. And in fact, Onow got our start because a friend of mine who moved from the village to the city, his sister was looking for work, and she ended up leaving Myanmar and going to Malaysia and getting into a situation where her passport was confiscated, and my friend had to go and rescue his sister back. And that's such a common story. And oftentimes movement is undertaken out of desperation, but not always. Sometimes movement is taken out of opportunity. Sometimes movement is taken out of just a large group of people that are moving at the same time. There's a varying amount of agency when it comes to movement. Sometimes people do it because they had the full faculty of choice. And in other situations, they move because it was a desperate move. And there's a wide spectrum on that. So I want to make sure that we're cognizant of that in many cases, migrants have agency. In many cases, our job is to help restore agency into those lives. So let me start by just talking about Southeast Asia, because that's where most of my focus has been. We're active in Myanmar and Thailand and Cambodia. And we're expanding throughout the region over the next few years. And the reason I bring up Southeast Asia is because it is this picture of the movement of people, which is actually taking place all over the world. So in Southeast Asia, there are millions of migrants across the region, and most of them, right at about half of them, are female. So we talk about cross-sectionality. We talk about issues of gender right alongside issues of migration, some of it refugee migration, some of it chosen migration. But Southeast Asia is this picture of the movement of people. And it really is a sign of just how much our world is shifting and moving. And the idea that that migration is an issue for a very narrow subset of business support organizations is a false idea. It actually is an idea that we need to mainstream. It's an idea that almost every business support organization needs to wrestle with. So I'm glad you're here. I'm preaching to the choir, as we say. I'm glad you're here, concerned about this issue, because it's a really important issue. And when we looked across Southeast Asia, we found only 49 capacity development organizations focused on SMEs. And 31 of them were focused on inequality and gender. So essentially the message is there's not enough. Most of these business support organizations are in only one country. So there is so much work to do here. And if you're in this room, one of the first things you should be doing is advocating to your donors, to your leaders, to your support, to your ecosystem, that this is an issue that needs more visibility. Absolutely not enough is being done in this space. So let's talk a little bit about how we support entrepreneurs who are migrants and refugees. So I'm going to kind of try to group this into 3 pieces. But first off, people movement is happening everywhere, and it is accelerating. We have to have a lens for this. We need to mainstream migrant support. That means we need to make this language really common. We need to make it shared across the whole ecosystem, and we need to make sure that we have a lens for our participants in our programs for the likelihood that they have moved. They may have moved cross-border, they may have moved from village to city. In both cases, if we have a customer decision journey lens, we'll realize that we need to provide support to these communities beyond our program. In the past, we were experts on business models. We were experts on entrepreneurship. In the current reality, we have to provide support beyond those basics. Because honestly, the challenges that all of these communities face, that they live through and work through, influence their businesses, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. And so we need to keep that lens so that we can grasp the opportunities and we can relieve the pressures of it. And like I said before, these communities oftentimes have narrow circles. We need to help them widen the circles. And networks, as a result, are more important than ever. If you look at the research, if you look at the data, if you do surveying, you'll realize that most entrepreneurs don't want content or learning. They want access to finance. They want access to networks. They want access to markets. And that is even more true for these audiences. So if your programming focused on migrants and refugees is content heavy, you might want to rethink that. And here are some reasons why. So I'm going to talk to you about social capital. I'm going to talk to you about formal finance, and I'm going to talk to you about participation. So first off, with social capital, realize that these audiences oftentimes have limited social support bases. And their support structures are often monogenerational. And by that, I mean, in many cases, if they're in their origin community, they have the benefit a lot of times of wisdom and guidance of those who are older, who have been through it before. But in many migrant and refugee communities, they find communities that are the same level. They're oftentimes peers. They're at the same age, the same experience, and that means they have a dearth of wisdom in that community. And so we have to consider that in our programming. And oftentimes they're working as a minority in a majority culture. You know this, but that leads to mistrust and fear, and oftentimes flowing both ways. A lot of times it's not just that the host community doesn't trust or is fearful or is suspicious of the migrant community. It oftentimes flows the other way as well. And that is something we have to help kind of break through. And there is, unfortunately, oftentimes a forced dependence on the majority culture. And that might mean that there's actually a majority culture individual who actually owns the business of the migrant. And they might be a friend, they might be family, or they might not. They may be a random person who just was willing to own the business. And that puts that migrant in a especially vulnerable position. To navigate these, we need to find examples of success. We need to connect them to support groups and allies. And essentially, I want to talk to you about Onow's experience with this. In many cases, we've been able to, as we've had to adapt, especially with our work in Myanmar and Thailand, we've been able to go into, for instance, into Thailand, where many Myanmars are currently flooding across the border, and be able to find communities who are receptive to refugees and migrants. And in that way, by receptive, I mean they're willing to open up their communities to them. They're willing to open up opportunities to work inside of markets. They're willing to essentially provide advice or guidance, but it's almost always very structured. It's almost as if we are creating an atmosphere where the host community is going to be asked for something by the migrant community, but it's limited, it's structured, it's organized. And that's what I would recommend to you, is that you should find allies, but you should keep it structured. You should keep the support expectation structured and limited so as to maintain that level of trust and respect. Now, let me just pivot to formal finance, because oftentimes among migrant communities, the bank accounts that they use are not often owned by the migrant. They're oftentimes owned by friends or family, or even, like I said before, random people. And that is such a vulnerable position to be in. And yet, oftentimes it's the only option. So it becomes even more important that you find allies and that you help, especially migrants and refugees, the transient communities, understand the risks of such an arrangement. And I think we found this to be most effective. Every time we do a program, we advocate to the funder for some kind of included specialized financial product, be it a grant or an arrangement with a formal financial service provider, or some kind of informal lending circle or saving circle. Every program must have some kind of arrangement for this. Otherwise, we're training for the sake of training, not actually for the sake of a successful business. Businesses need capital. We need to create some mechanism to capital, and that might mean grants, even small grants. But I think anytime you do anything with refugee, migrant, transient communities, you really need some arrangement for capital in the program. That might mean you create an all new program. That might mean you find a special donor for it, but it really has to be part of any program you have. We've found enormous success in the launch of businesses and the success of businesses when we include some kind of a financial product. And then the third topic, participation. We must hire refugees and migrants to deliver these programs. It's in many cases, it's unacceptable to expect that transient communities can benefit from programs that have not had refugees and migrants in the design, in the delivery, in the actual running of the program. We must have members of these communities delivering these programs. That's not to say that we shouldn't have people who are not transient delivering, but at the very least, we need to see refugees and migrants playing a major role in the delivery of these programs. That can be challenging to figure out how to hire from those communities, but it's a challenge that we have to navigate. We cannot avoid it. It demands much from us, yes. And here's the other piece. We have to lean into higher touch methods. This means more mentorship and coaching, less classroom, less content, more actual sitting across the table from people, especially from these communities. Reduce emphasis on content, increase high touch mentorship. And now to my final topic, which we spend a lot of time with at Onow. Tech is delicate. It is oftentimes biased toward the majority culture. It might be biased in the form of language. It might be biased in the assumptions around how an entrepreneur can operate. But the reality is, especially if you're thinking about today's tools, artificial intelligence, especially large language models, these are almost always trained on a majority culture, probably English language speaking. So translation is not enough. In general, translation does not get around the differences that a transient culture might have, both to the majority culture and to Western English-speaking culture. So if you're adopting any kind of artificial intelligence, you have to do a lot to prompt it effectively to be relevant and helpful and not harmful to these transient communities. So if you're interested in understanding more about how to build accessible tech, especially for these transient communities, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you because this can do major damage if we're not very careful about how we deploy tech into these programs. And last, This is challenging for us all because of the way our oftentimes our business models are built. We must move out of time-bound programs toward infinite support models. And by that, I mean business owners, once they come through our programs, launch their businesses and begin operating, especially in transient communities, they come up against problems that are new constantly. As they broaden their circle, as they engage with more of the culture, they will come up against new challenges that we did not prepare them for. And that can only be navigated if support communities are there, if networks have been expanded, and if we've been able to help them access markets more effectively. So I would challenge us all to think of ways to provide ongoing support beyond the time of our finite programs. Rod, that's it for me. Thanks a lot, everyone. If you have any questions or anything, please just reach out. My email is matt@onow.com. I'm happy to help as you build tools and deliver programs for this community. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you to all our speakers. That was really like a great way to find insights, both on like what connects these different communities together and also what does inclusive support look like. So something that I've learned today and also something that kind of uh, was talked about throughout the speakers is this concept of nothing about us without us, like really getting to be with the community, understanding what it's like to be part of the community and not just deploying or implementing programs that might not actually work for their current contexts. And I'm really glad to have learned that today. Really appreciate all that we were able to learn from the speakers. So I will now open the floor up for anybody who wants to share or ask any questions to Moni, Matt, McKenna, and Cynthia. Or if you have any insights that you want to bring to the table, that is also totally open. So if you'd like, you can raise your hand also, or you can also put it on the chat if you have any questions or insights that you'd like to share to the group. So does anybody want to start us off? Okay, maybe while we're waiting for people, I have a question which is open to any of our speakers. So we know that the reality for a lot of incubators and accelerators is that they rely a lot of their funding on grants or donors, and that might mean that these programs tend to be more general audience, right? So what are like quick fixes or quick ways that maybe they could do to kind of gain more maybe not gain, but like to be able to be more visible to these communities so that their programs are able to welcome refugee, rural, or indigenous entrepreneurs and be part of the programs that they're able to implement. So anybody from the speakers, please feel free to unmute and yeah.
Rod, can I go ahead with that?
Sure, yeah, go ahead,
What
Matt.
I recommend, and this is something we started doing. It's been 6 or 8 years ago now. We used to emphasize gender disaggregated data, and that's really important. But I would also say disaggregating your data against people who have moved. You can't really ask this community, are you a migrant? Are you a refugee? But you can seek out an understanding of who you might already be supporting, who has moved. So just in general on our intake forms, on any kind of when we promote our programs using social media, we oftentimes try to attach that lens to what we're doing to try to uncover, have you relocated, have you moved, even internally or beyond into another country. But there are ways to kind of surface that as long as we have a lens for it. That's what I would recommend first.
Awesome, thank you. I see Alice raised her hand, but maybe Moni, McKenna, Cynthia, if you have other thoughts on the question before we move to Alice. So far. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Matt, for
Okay.
the answer. Alice, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for the great presentation. My name is Alice Wawero. I work in TechnoServe based here in Kenya. I have a question for Matt, especially from his last point where he has talked about moving to infinite programming. I would want Matt probably to explain about that because every time we are implementing programs, we have to focus on sustainability. How do you exit and leaving people more sustainable? Please explain your point in relation to that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Alice. So you're tapping into the primary challenge of all business support organizations, right? How do we provide support over time beyond the typical time-bound nature of our programs? And I would say most of that driven by donor limitations. So one thing I have found useful is that Onow has worked to develop multiple revenue streams into our program. So we have programming that is paid programming, which is an excellent source of unrestricted funding for us. We also deliver services almost as like a consultant kind of style with other nonprofits. And then we have oftentimes donor program support. And I find that when I come to this with unrestricted sources, and I have an intentional lens to provide support to my business owners beyond the program for at minimum 6 months, though it would be better to be at 12 to 18 months. I'm able to justify a certain amount of my time for my coaches and my mentors to receive contacts and calls from people who've gone through the program before. Now that takes planning, but also we at this point, anytime we do any kind of program with a partner, nonprofit, or donor funded, we tell them explicitly ahead of time that they must fund an additional support period beyond that time-bound effort. So we build into it an intentional 6 to 12 month ongoing support after classroom phases, after the typical cycle. And in general, we haven't been required to essentially, we haven't been required necessarily to report back on that, because in the eyes of the donor, a lot of times they're done. Like they've already closed the books on the program, but they've always found it beneficial when we have come to them and told them what the actual follow-up was and how engaged business owners were after the program. So now we just require it. Essentially, we require it of our donor. They're gonna have to pay for an additional 6 to 12 month support effort. Alice, that's how I would approach it.
Thanks so much,
Wow.
Matt.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alice, for your question. I wonder if any of the other speakers want to share, if there's any other ideas or suggestions apart from what Matt has shared.
For me, it's no suggestion, just an add-on, and I'm happy that Matt has been able to talk a bit about that, because even for us at Inoko, we are talking about how do we have post-program support. If for us to track impact, it has to be more than the 9 months or the 12 months that we offer our programming. So we are also having those conversations of how do we do this? How long do we need to support them? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 6 cycles of investment? So really looking forward. And Matt, I think I'll definitely reach out to have more conversations around this as we develop it.
Awesome. Thanks, Cynthia. Any other questions from the group or sharing? Love to hear from the others here. You can raise your hand or you can also chat it. Okay, so I have a question from the one of the participants around like best practices to support refugee entrepreneurs in more insecure areas. So maybe they didn't really expand on what insecure means, but I'm guessing politically insecure for the refugee entrepreneurs? And maybe I can expand this to even include Indigenous entrepreneurs, Moni. Like, are there any best practices when they are currently in a context where it's not very safe for them? What would be the best way as entrepreneur support organizations to do that? Would like to start? Maybe we can start with Moni this time, if that's okay.
Sure, of course. There's a lot of things. I think a lot of one thing about Indigenous entrepreneurs is that usually to get legal protection, you need to have legal recognition from the government. And if your tribe is not being legally recognized by the government, you do not fall under a legal protection as an Indigenous community. A lot of time when there has to be work with Indigenous community that is not being legally registered or legally recognized under the Constitution as an Indigenous community. There are a few loopholes into getting this is that beyond Indigenous identity, there's also ethnic minority identity. Depending on which constitution we're talking about, there's also ethnic minority identity, which allow for a community to be able to fall under the protection of a certain constitutional law as an ethnic minority rather than an Indigenous community. This is also one thing, but again, it really depends on the Indigenous community themselves on what they prefer to be taken into this field of incubation of work of so on. But there's legally there's these type of loophole as someone who provide entrepreneurship support. I think we mentioned this already is that, and Matt talked a lot about this already, is less focus on content and more focus on mentoring and support. So if we can stop the idea of let's do a 3-day training to a more hands-on, let's go to your business and let's spend 4 hours together looking into the business, do this type of mentoring, coaching, these tailored support. I think when there is this relationship and there's this approach to Indigenous entrepreneur, it kind of doesn't really have to look into oh, is it safe for them to come out? Is it safe for them to travel or move? Is it safe for them to It's more of like, okay, would it be possible for us to provide this type of support to you in this certain area, this certain language, and so on, so on. So it's less about them coming to us, more of like how can we bring it to the community themselves. Of course, we have to make sure that we're also safe in the context. So also looking at that, but in this, we have to look at the power dynamic of who hold the power in this relationship. And most of the time, it's us who's the provider that hold the power. We're able to go into the territory without any harm. When it's for them, it's hard for them to move out of the territory without any harm. So I feel that looking into the power dynamic of who holds the power in this relationship can also help facilitate the relationship of incubation or business support. But this is my perspective and my experience. I think our other speaker will also have something very amazing to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Moni. I think I'll go to Cynthia and then maybe McKenna and Matt. McKenna, I know you were out for a bit, so I'll just repeat the question so you can think about it while Cynthia gives her perspective. So the person was asking about best practices to support any refugee, rural, or Indigenous entrepreneurs in insecure areas. So insecure maybe politically or in any other aspect. So if you have any best practices there. Cynthia,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Thank you, Moni. I think for us, we work really closely with UNHCR so that we have, guidelines on how to interact with the refugees, what time to access them, and what offers we can give them. So we work in Dadaab, in Kakuma, and mostly like Dadaab, we work in the camps. And in Dadaab is insecure, meaning we have to work with our colleagues who are also from the camp. So we do encourage to actually hire from the community. So because if you have for the community, it's easy for them to even continuously work with the entrepreneurs, even when we're not able to access the camps. So that is one. We work very closely with the community, and we also hire in the community. And then also work with the Department of Refugee Services. And also we also, heavily depend on them on the guidelines on when to also access the camp, especially when we are in Kakuma. And also they also have services and even areas that we can use for us to be able to conduct our services. So we do have offices in the area, but also we do work with other organizations that we can collaborate to be able to give these services. So one, work closely with UNHCR, work closely with the Department of Refugee Services, and also hire in the community so that you can be able to work with the communities and also interpret and be able to serve the communities the way they need to be served. So yeah.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. I'll hand it over to McKenna.
Yeah, I've had like 2 seconds, but I think the first thing that I can think of off the top of my head, it's similar to what Cynthia said. For us, we do work with the local communities as well as the local intermediaries, just because they're on the ground. And we also, because a lot of the times when we're working with the rural communities, they don't have that tech aspect. Bringing in the intermediary kind of allows them to have that tech aspect and then kind of take it offline to work with the local population, and then we can also have now the tech interface with the intermediary that's working within the space. So we really leverage a lot of local community support. And also what we do is when we get external funding, we trickle it down back to also these local communities, so we can kind of have this chain of, like, I'd say, ecosystem building. And that's maybe the first thing I can think of off the top of my mind.
Thanks, McKenna. Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, so two issues to me. Number one, it's very common in the middle of humanitarian crisis for most donors and especially development agencies to assume that entrepreneurship doesn't have a role to play in those specific kind of moments, that it's far more important to deliver healthcare aid, to deliver nutrition. And by and large, I agree with that. But I would also say that we have a larger role around, especially where young generations are most impacted in those kinds of moments of instability. So I'm speaking especially from experience in Myanmar at the moment, that many times trying to preserve a generation's ability to experience successful business in the future requires that they be able to try entrepreneurship in the present. So even when they're in places of instability, be it conflict zones or in waiting zones where refugees have moved out of conflict and into even holding places, it's still important that they get experience and practice understanding supply and demand and how markets work and how to create value in those communities. So I think number one, we have a role to play in advocating for ongoing entrepreneurship skills development, even in conflict communities, conflict zones. But then second, that advocacy for grant funding is even more important in conflict zones. And that's because typical financial products do not work in those situations. Banks don't lend, microfinance institutions don't lend, investors don't invest when there is that much instability and conflict in conflict zones. And so we have to advocate even more so and ensure that some kind of resource is going to those business owners in the middle of those kinds of situations. So I think just in general, we have a role to play. That's an advocacy role, but also as we design our programs and as we propose, we need to make sure and include those kinds of pieces and components to our programs that we've proposed.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts on this. It seems like, with this kind of work, it's really like a community of care. And then we have to kind of define what kind of support we can give as an ESO, and then also leverage those that are in the community and those that work with the community to also be there to help support in other areas where maybe we can't. And I think that's such a, I guess, beautiful ecosystem if ideally it works that way. And yeah, it's just awesome to hear that. So I will open the floor just one last time for maybe one last question before we end, or any insights or reflections that people want to share. Maybe I'll give 30 seconds if anybody wants to raise their hand or put it in the chat. Right, going once, going twice. All right, awesome. I think people have a lot to think about. They have a lot to digest from today's session. It was such a meaty session, very rich with information that a lot of ESOs can use to be more inclusive, to give more inclusive support to refugee, rural, and Indigenous entrepreneurs. So I'd like to thank again Moni, Matt, Cynthia, and McKenna for being with us today and sharing their experiences. For the people in the room, if you'd like to speak to the speakers, please let me know. You have my email because I invited all of you, and then I can connect you, and then they can also share their experiences. Yeah, just like what Moni mentioned, he put his LinkedIn on the chat. Awesome. So before we end, Test, if you can please share the screen. We'd like to invite everyone here and incubators and accelerators to join the Pollinate Impact Network. We are a network of impact incubators and accelerators in the Global South. And with membership, we do send weekly funding opportunities, more discussions like this, especially more in-depth ones. We're also in the process of doing more roundtable discussions to create collective action teams, which I think, knowing the interest in this topic, one of this could be around inclusive support for refugee, rural, and Indigenous entrepreneurs. We can get that off the ground. Matt and Cynthia are both part of the network, so we could have a collective action team around this. And then we also have our potluck this December 4 to 6, which is our biannual gathering of all our members, and it's happening in Bangalore, India. If you'd like to know more or join us, please let me know. We'd love to have as much participation as possible for our potluck. So, all right. One last thing, I will turn on our feedback form. We'd love to hear more about how the session went for you today. If you have any suggestions as well as any comments for today's session, we'd love to know. I just launched the poll, and if we'd love for you to answer, let us know your thoughts. Okay, while you're answering that, maybe I can give a minute each to our speakers just to give like a closing remark of anything that they want the audience to kind of leave with after the session. So I'll do the reverse order if that's okay, not to put Matt on the spot, but we'll start with Matt and then McKenna, Cynthia, and then Moni. All right.
Sure. If you can only do one thing, abandon content and adopt mentorship models for this audience.
Thanks, Matt. McKenna?
My theme remains the same and include local players in local solutions. And I have to drop off, so thank you.
Sure. Thank you, McKenna. Cynthia?
Employ more refugees in this space to do the work.
Thank you. And last but not least, Moni.
I would say the principle of nothing about us without us.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers again. And thank you everyone for joining our session. It was such a rich discussion, and hopefully we get to see you in our next sessions. Thank you so much, and you all have a great day. Bye.